Greetings gamers, I'm Anto, and today we're talking about how to improvise as a dungeon master and run a game by the seat of your pants. Spend long enough as a dungeon master talking to other people in person or online, and you'll eventually hear about a time where someone's players went totally off the rails and went in a direction that the dungeon master was not prepared for. So what do you do when your entire session goes off the rails? Everything that you've prepared is useless and you've got to improv an entire session. Well, today we're going to talk about how you can do a little prep work to make your improvising that much easier. To give you some real world context on this, I'm going to talk about my most recent session where all of the content that I had planned ended up going out of the window as the players went off the rails in a direction I completely did not expect, and I ended up having to improvise an entire 4-hour session. My players had just finished saving a wizard's college and they were mopping up, talking to NPCs, gathering things. 2 of the 4 members of the party had headed down to the docks to start loading the ship, getting ready to depart the island they were on, and 2 of the members of the party were finishing up their business, talking to a few NPCs and getting ready to leave. The players have still got a mental link spell active so they can talk to each other even though they're not in the same physical space. The 2 players that are still at the college were wrapping things up when the headmaster of the college arrived. They have a small brief interaction between themselves and the headmaster. And then the headmaster walks towards a blank wall, summons a doorway in that wall, walks through it and disappears. When I described this, I just thought it was a really baller thing for the headmaster to do, and I didn't really give it any more thought. But then came those 4 simple words from one of the players. Can I follow him? Of course you can try and follow him, I say, madly scrambling to think of what is about to happen. I know that I've not prepared for this, and I know that something needs to be on the other side of that wall. It would have been really easy for me to say, of course you can try, and then have them fail, but where is the drama in that? Where's the fun in that? So I asked for a couple of knowledge and spellcraft checks, and the 2 players follow the wizard through this magically summoned door into the vaults held deep beneath the Mage's College. At this point, I know I need to buy time because I have nothing prepared for this area, and I need to be able to put things in front of the players to slow them down to give me the time to prep. So I make this corridor incredibly long. It probably stretched for more than a mile, and every maybe 10 feet there is an archway cut out in the corridor walls, and in those archways are magical artifacts. This is a really long giant vault. Doing this meant that the players were moving slowly because they didn't want to get seen by the headmaster whom they just followed in here. But by placing all of these magical items in front of them, I knew that they were going to stop and look and ask questions, and in doing so, that would give me the time to keep laying the rails in front of this train. This also allowed me to introduce some really cool magical items into the world, not necessarily ones that the players will ever get their hands on, but just cool stuff that enriches the world. And it gave those 2 players that were on the boat a chance to learn about what's happened via their mental link and start moving back towards the college. I knew at the end of this corridor there was the potential that there would be combat. So I wanted all 4 party members to be present because this is a wizard's college. They were going to be following the headmaster of the college. If they ended up in a combat with him, he's going to be incredibly powerful, and 2 players on their own wouldn't be enough. So this bought the time to allow those other 2 players to catch up and to allow the group to rendezvous. So 2 of the players are advancing down the corridor and they start seeing some really dark magical items. I got most of these from a D100 list from a website called DnD Speak, which I'll link in the description below. These sorts of D100 tables for items, NPCs, interactions, things that you might find in someone's pockets, these are incredibly useful when you're improvising. In my OneNote I have an entire section for D100 lists, so when the players started walking down the corridor asking what they saw, I pulled up my list of magical artifacts, scrolled through it to see things that looked kind of cool, and then started telling them what they saw. One of the first things they came across was the Ark of the Famine. Now on D&D Speak this is just described as a child-sized coffin, but I wanted something spicier, so I told them off the top of my head, just on the fly, that this was a magical artifact, and previously, maybe hundreds or thousands of years ago, there'd been a great famine and millions of people had died. We're talking Black Plague level of event here, and all the death was being caused by a terrible magic. So a group of wizards contained all of that dark magic within the body of a innocent sacrifice of a child. They bound that dread magic into a child and then magically sealed this child inside this coffin. So I described the coffin as being covered in chains and magical runes, really secure looking coffin. And this held them up for quite a while they talked about the implications of what was in that coffin, what was going on as they discussed it. And that gave me the time to think of some more magic items from the list that I was going to put in front of them and start thinking about what they were going to find once they reached the end of this very long corridor. So they carried on down the corridor and eventually they came across another magical artifact, of which one of them rolled high enough on their knowledge check to identify. And that was a blank gravestone that I described as being an incredibly powerful magical object that once you engraved someone's name upon it, that person would die. Immediately they started thinking, we could use this on our big bad evil guy, we could use it against this person or that NPC. And then I told them that they would know that even though you engrave their name upon this and they are guaranteed to die, you have no idea the manner in which they would die. So you could engrave someone's name on this gravestone and they would die, but that could be through a tsunami that would wipe out thousands. It could be through a great plague that killed countless people. So they decided not to use it, but they made a note of the fact that it's there. And I think in their mind, should things ever get really, really, really bad, they might circle back to that and try and use it. By this point, after introducing them to a few magical items, a plan was starting to form inside my head. I knew that the thing the headmaster had come down here to make sure was secure was going to be a person. I was picturing a Hannibal Lecter style scene with an incredibly dangerous person in some kind of magical prison. So I started flicking through my list of NPCs that the players had heard about or met, and I couldn't think of anyone that warranted this sort of treatment. So I threw a few more artifacts at the players just to slow them down, get them to have a look and talk to each other while the other two members of the party caught up, and then it hit me. One of my players recently started a new character who is a Dhampir, a half vampire, and as part of their backstory, they are looking for something called the Child of Blood. Now the player and the character don't know what the Child of Blood is. That was just something that they threw into their backstory as just a motivation. Well, I decided that I was going to put the Child of Blood at the end of this corridor. The character is quite new to the party, so the player absolutely wasn't expecting to come across such a vital part of their backstory so early. So that was going to be a nice surprise, and it fit with the plan that was starting to form in my mind as to why someone would keep something alive and imprisoned down here. Who was the Child of Blood? Where did they come from? How did they end up here? Why are they being kept here? These were all great questions which told me that this was a good idea, that having them here would be interesting and dramatic. Knowing that I was about to introduce a really important NPC and something pivotal to a character's backstory, I didn't want to get it wrong. So I called for a break. I said to the players, look, I need 5 minutes just to get my notes together, so go get yourselves a drink, go to the bathroom, what have you, and then come back and we'll resume. So my players take a break and I'm sat there thinking, who is this vampire? And then I remembered that in the background, in the history of my world that I wrote long before the campaign ever began, centuries ago there was a heir to the throne who was killed and made into a vampire. And then he later went on to kill his brother, who at the time was the king of the realm. And this just sparked with me. I knew that this should be the Child of Blood. Hundreds of years old vampire, royal bloodline, very powerful vampire, has killed a king. That's the sort of NPC, that's the sort of person with enough status to be held in a magical vault underneath one of the most powerful magical places in the world. It's also a character that's so evil it immediately would raise questions as to why the good guys are keeping them here, and I wanted that tension. So I recalled the players and we played out the scene. The two characters that were already in the vault crept forward, made contact with the headmaster. They learned that this vampire was being kept prisoner here. They learned who he was and a little bit about his fluff. And then the other two members of the party arrived and all hell broke loose. One of the members of my party is a lawful good cleric named Godfrey, and he hates vampires. He hates them with a passion. So when he arrived and saw this incredibly powerful vampire that was helpless and chained, he couldn't resist. And through his actions and the actions of the headmaster trying to stop him, this vampire, who's known as Cain, broke free. Now, I knew that this was a possibility as I was forming my plan. So I went online and I looked up a list of NPCs from Pathfinder. I scrolled through the list down to the challenge rating that I thought would be appropriate and looked for something that I could either use as a vampire or reskin as a vampire, because this combat I knew was going to be very short and I needed something to base this version of the vampire on. So I grabbed a profile. I think it was a vampire profile, but it wasn't exactly the one I would use if I was designing this from scratch, but it was good enough for this particular fight. Anytime a combat is coming or happens that I'm not prepared for, I always pull up this list of monsters and NPCs, sort it by the challenge rating just to get a rough idea. Once I've got a rough idea, I can adjust the stats on the fly based on my party. I know how much damage they can do in a round, so I know what sort of health this creature should have. I know how much health they have, so I know what sort of damage output the creature should have. And then I'll look at special abilities and I'll very quickly decide what I want. I knew I wanted this vampire to have teleport, which is why he's being magically contained, because I wanted him to be able to teleport out of there. And obviously I wanted him to be able to turn to mist, because that's how he was going to escape the clutches of the party. So the child of blood, Cain the Vampire King, has broken his bonds, and he immediately grabs onto Godfrey, and all the players freak. They think Godfrey is about to be bitten and turned into the thing he hates most. So their number one priority, instead of stopping Cain, becomes dislodging Godfrey. The pair of them stand in the center of this circular room swirling with magical energy. They stand locked in a grapple, and one of the other characters, Baydar the Dragonborn, rips them apart, and in doing so he gives Cain the opening he needs. Cain turns to mist. The players start scrambling after him. They're thinking what they can do to prevent him getting through that door. They're firing spells. They're trying to stop him. As he's going down this corridor, he passes the Ark of Famine, sees it, and decides he wants it. So he unmists, he reaches through the magical barrier that's containing the Ark of the Famine, he pulls it out. The players see that the flesh of his arms has burned away, and they learn that he is functionally immortal, which is how he was able to reach through this incredibly powerful trap. They try to cast a binding spell on him to stop him getting away, but it fails, and he teleports away with the Ark of the Famine. So because of the player's actions and inactions, an incredibly powerful vampire has escaped his magical prison, and he has left with a deadly magical artifact that has the potential to kill millions. All of this happened because I didn't say, no, you can't go through that door. All of this would never have happened if I wasn't prepared to improvise and go with what my players wanted to do. And even though this escalated some of the plot points a lot faster than I expected, even though I didn't even know what those plot points were going to be in some cases yet, it's resulted in a much more dramatic story than I think I would have come to on my own. The Dhampir character thought they were going to have to spend a long time searching for the Child of Blood, but instead they followed a hunch and ended up finding him in a magical prison in the bottom of the Mages College, which is much cooler than I think anything I would have ended up coming up with in a different situation. And the cleric now has to come to terms with the fact that because of his actions and people's reactions to the things he did, an incredibly powerful evil creature has been set free and now has the tools to create mass chaos. So don't be afraid of improvising, because if you are open to it and if you are calm in how you approach it, you can end up with an amazing session that you would never have planned on your own. So my biggest tip for you when DMing by the seat of your pants is not to improvise. plan as much as you can beforehand. Go and gather random tables of items, NPCs, locations, so that when your players ask you a question, even if you don't have the answer, even if you can't think of the answer quickly, you can roll a dice and give them an answer. And then you can work out later what that answer means. You can iron out all the little details, but you can give them an answer, and that makes them feel like you have prepared everything and that they are in a real world that is rich and vast. Be prepared to delay your players by putting choices and options and obstacles in their path that force them to slow down, to stop, to talk among each other while you prepare. If you ever get really stuck in, let's say, a dungeon, give the players 2 doors. Give 2 doors that seem exactly the same, that if they open, seem exactly the same. It will, in almost all cases, cause them to stop, and they will spend probably a lot longer than you're expecting talking about which of these 2 options to take. And while they do that, you can be there prepping what's on the other side of this area. On the other hand, don't be afraid to call for breaks. If you know that something big is coming up as a result of all this improvisation, call a break. It might not be the best time to do it. Try and wait for a cliffhangery moment or the ideal time. But if there is no ideal time, just say to them, look, take a break, go get a drink. I need 5 minutes to make sure this is all ready. They'll understand, and the result will be a much better game for it. And most importantly, say yes. You can choose not to kick in a hag's door and charge in your sword ablaze in any game. You can choose not to follow a wizard through a magically conjured door to find out what's in the vaults beneath a wizard's college in any game. You're here to play D&D with your friends, to have an awesome time and to tell an interesting story together. So if they say, I want to do this interesting thing, say yes. Figure out what it is that happens after. Use the tools that we've talked about to come up with a short-term solution if you need, but say yes. If they want to do something cool, say yes, and you will have a better game for it. That's it, folks. That's my guide to improvisation and DMing by the seat of your pants. I really hope that you enjoyed the video and found these tips useful, and I'd really like to know if you'd like to hear more of how to use these tips in a game with some examples from my games in the comments below, or whether you'd just rather have the tips in a straight fact kind of form. If you like what you see, don't forget to hit that like button, and if you are new here, subscribe for new RPG videos every single week. I'd also like to know what your most interesting improvisation story is down in the comments below, and until next time, happy gaming. Thanks for watching. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below for new content every single Friday. And if you want to keep watching, well, there's another couple videos for you to watch just over there. Happy gaming.